Em 1925, na cidade de Dayton, Scopes, jovem mestre, aceitou o vão. A lei Bator dizia que não se podia ensinar que o homem veio do animal. Os jornais chamaram de julgamento do macaco. A cidade virou palco, um grande espetáculo. Não era só fé contra a ciência, era sobre raça, poder e consciência.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something you hear all the time in these kinds of debates, right? That classic line, well, you can't disprove God. It just stops the conversation dead, doesn't it?
It really does. It's like this ultimate shield. And that's exactly what we need to, well, carefully take apart today.
So what's the plan?
Okay, so this deep dive, it's based on material that really digs into that statement. We're not trying to, prove God doesn't exist. That's notoriously tricky, proving a negative.
Right.
Instead, we want to get around that whole unfalsifiable defense. We're looking at where science, the scientific method, actually bumps up against specific claims made about God.
Specific claims, like miracles or answered prayers.
Exactly. When someone says God has certain attributes, certain powers, and acts in the world in specific ways, can we test those claims? And if those testable attributes don't hold up under scrutiny, what's actually left of the concept?
Yeah, because often this whole thing just descends into shouting, doesn't it? You've got, say, Richard Dawkins on one side, absolutely certain there's no God.
Right. The strong atheist position.
And then maybe someone like William Craig on the other, just as certain there is a God.
Dogmatic certainty.
Yep. And the sources we're looking at suggest, well, maybe both extremes are missing something important here.
Definitely. They might be missing the crucial first step, defining which God we're even talking about. Because, the definition changes everything about whether science can even engage with the question.
Ah, okay. So it depends on the type of God.
Absolutely. That distinction is key, especially when you're trying to figure out the boundary between science and, metaphysics or philosophy.
Right.
The second someone claims their God does something in the universe, performs a miracle, heals someone, parts the seas, whatever that claim, suddenly jumps out of pure philosophy.
And lands right in science's lap.
Pretty much. It becomes a hypothesis about the observable world. Now, if the claim is purely abstract, like God is love or God is existence itself, well, that's a different conversation. Then we need to talk about, the burden of proof and who should be providing evidence for what.
Okay, let's dig into that. We can maybe start with someone from the science side. Michio Kaku, the physicist, he has a particular take on this.
He does. Kaku basically frames the whole question of God's existence as undecidable.
Undecidable. That sounds a bit like giving up, or maybe just being cautious.
It's definitely scientific caution. It comes from how physics works. Kaku's point is that science only deals with decidable statements.
Meaning
Statements you can test, reproduce, and, crucially, falsify. Like if I claim gravity works a certain way, you can design an experiment.
drop an apple. Or a cell phone these days.
Exactly. You can test it. Either the results support the claim or they contradict it. But Kaku argues that the existence of, some kind of cosmic entity, you can't really design that experiment. So by definition, it's just outside of science for him.
Okay, methodologically that makes sense. But, someone like Dawkins would probably push back hard there, wouldn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
Because religious groups are constantly making claims about the physical world, pray and you'll be healed, or this relic cures diseases. Those sound pretty testable.
They are, and that's exactly the tension. Kaku's undecidable stance really only works if you define God as totally passive, totally outside space and time, not interfering at all.
But that's not the God most people believe in, is it?
Not usually, no. The Abrahamic religions, for instance, describe a God who's very hands-on, answering prayers, causing floods, directing history.
Getting involved.
Right. And the moment that God supposedly intervenes, even just to nudge a single atom, well, that hypothesis becomes scientifically testable, at least in principle.
Which brings us right back to that crucial point you mentioned, defining God. Einstein talked about this, didn't he? And Kaku picks up on it too.
Yes, and this is where a lot of the confusion, maybe even deliberate equivocation, happens in debates. People use the one word God, but they might mean two completely different things.
Okay, what are the two?
So first, there's what Einstein called the personal God. This is the God most people probably picture as sort of an anthropomorphic being.
The one who cares about what you eat, who you marry, judges your actions.
Exactly. The God of vengeance, the God who smites people, answers petitions, gets involved in human history. The God of Moses, Isaac, and Jacob, as the texts say.
The old man with the beard archetype, basically. Very invested in us tiny humans on this small planet.
That's the one. And Einstein was very clear he couldn't believe in that God, found it incompatible with a rational view of the cosmos.
Okay, so that's God number one. What's the second?
The second is often called Spinoza's God. This one is completely different. It's impersonal. It's the God of, like, harmony, beauty, simplicity, the elegance of the universe's laws.
So not a being, but the order of things.
Pretty much. It's like a placeholder for that deep sense that the universe, with its incredible mathematical structure and physical laws, couldn't just be a random accident. It points to some underlying elegance.
But wait, if Kaku rejects the personal God, how does he talk about seeking the mind of God in physics? Isn't that sneaking theology back in?
That's a really good question. I think when Kaku uses that phrase, mind of God, it's more poetic license, you know.
Ah, okay.
For him, it's basically synonymous with finding the ultimate theory, the theory of everything, that Einstein was searching for, one beautiful equation capturing all the laws of physics. He links it to things like string theory, this idea of cosmic music in higher dimensions. It's the beauty and elegance of the maths he's calling God.
So if God just means the beautiful inherent laws of physics, then being an atheist seems kind of weird.
Exactly. If God is just a fancy word for the laws of nature, then atheism doesn't make much sense. He'd be arguing against physics itself, which is absurd for scientists.
But you mentioned this can be a rhetorical trick.
Oh, absolutely. This is really important. People might invoke this sophisticated Spinoza-type God in an argument because it sounds intellectual and it's hard to argue against.
Right.
But very often, the same person in their daily life isn't praying to the law of gravity to fix their car. You know, they're still holding on to the idea of that older, personal, interventionist God, even while defending the abstract one. It's a pivot.
Okay, this talk about unfalsifiability inevitably brings up those famous thought experiments, doesn't it? The unicorn, or Bertrand Russell's teapot.
Yep, the go-to analogies.
Yeah.
The idea being, well, you can't prove unicorns don't exist. Maybe they're on Mars or in another dimension.
We can't check everywhere.
So the argument goes, you shouldn't demand proof that God doesn't exist either. It's the same logic.
And Russell's teapot.
Very similar. Russell said, imagine I claim there's a China teapot orbiting the sun somewhere out between Earth and Mars. It's too small to see with any telescope.
So impossible to disprove, currently.
Exactly. But, Russell argued, would it be reasonable for everyone else to just believe him? Or worse, organize society around teapot worship, just because no one can definitively prove it isn't there?
Of course not. That sounds absurd.
And that was his point. He was highlighting the epistemic limit, the boundary of what we can know, and the absurdity of demanding disproof for every wild claim someone cooks up.
The default position should be skepticism. Don't believe it until there's evidence for it.
Precisely. The burden of proof lies squarely on the person making the extraordinary claim. We don't need to disprove invisible pink unicorns. We just don't believe in them because there's zero reason to believe.
Yeah.
Applying this to God means, show me the evidence for God, don't ask me to disprove something you haven't supported.
But applying this directly to religion can be tricky, can't it? The sources suggest the analogy breaks down a bit.
It does in a couple of crucial ways. First is just Russell's original point about epistemic responsibility, don't be universally gullible. But the second is much more serious, and it's the ethical limit. The material we look at puts it bluntly, no one kills in the name of the unicorn.
Ah. Meaning religious beliefs aren't just abstract ideas like a teapot.
Exactly. They have consequences, huge ones, social, political, sometimes violent consequences. People legislate based on these beliefs. They discriminate. They build massive tax-exempt organizations. They influence elections. Historically, they've started wars, all in the name of gods.
So when a belief system has that kind of real-world impact, claiming it's immune to scrutiny because it's hard to disprove like a teapot, that's problematic.
It's more than problematic, it's dangerous. It's using a philosophical point about the limits of knowledge as a shield to protect claims that actively shape and sometimes harm society. Think about debates over science education, reproductive rights, LGBTQ+ rights. These are often directly influenced by religious claims shielded by this you can't disprove it logic.
So invoking the teapot logic in that context risks giving a free pass to potentially harmful beliefs, under the cover of sounding reasonable or humble about what we know.
Precisely. It's a misuse of intellectual humility. Yes, we should be humble about the ultimate nature of reality, but that humility shouldn't be twisted into a justification for refusing to question specific, powerful, and often damaging dogmas. We need to be really careful when that happens.
Okay, let's shift gears then. If we sort of set aside the super abstract, unfalsifiable, God is everything idea.
Yeah, the Spinoza type guy.
To focus on the personal God, the one who supposedly acts in the world. That's where the rubber meets the road empirically, right? Because those actions, those attributes can be tested.
This is the crucial move. This
Yep.
is where the claims of, say, the Abrahamic God leave the realm of pure philosophy and enter the lab, so to speak. Believers claim this God does specific things, heals the sick, created the world in a certain way, delivers justice, speaks to people.
And each of those is a testable hypothesis.
Essentially, yes, they are claims about how reality works. And when we apply the scientific method, our best tool for understanding reality, how do these claims stack up? Well, the evidence suggests, not well. They consistently seem to fail empirical tests.
Okay, let's take them one by one. What about the big one? Prayer. Specifically, prayers for healing.
Right, the claim. God intervenes to heal the sick in response to prayer. This was put to a major test in the STEP experiment, published back in 2006.
STEP? What was that?
It stood for Study of the Therapeutic Effects of Intercessory Prayer. It was a huge, rigorously designed study, double-blind, randomized, controlled trial, nearly 1,800 patients undergoing cardiac bypass surgery.
Wow, that's specific. Why cardiac bypass?
Because it's a serious, standardized medical event with measurable outcomes, complication rates, recovery times, things you can track objectively.
And how did they test prayer rigorously? That seems tricky.
It is. They divided patients into 3 groups. Group 1 got standard care, no prayer organized by the study. Group 2 received prayer from distant congregations, but crucially, the patients had no idea they were being prayed for.
To control for the placebo effect.
Exactly. Group 3 also received prayer, and they were told they were being prayed for. The whole setup was double-blind patients didn't know which group they were in, except Group 3 knew they were getting prayers, and the medical staff evaluating them didn't know either.
Okay, solid design. So the million-dollar question, did prayer work?
The results were pretty stark. There was absolutely no difference in recovery rates or major complications between the group that got prayer without knowing it, Group 2, and the group that got no prayer, Group 1.
No effect at all.
None that was measurable. But here's the kicker, something the sources really emphasize. Group 3, the ones who knew they were being prayed for, they actually did slightly worse.
Worse? Why? That seems counterintuitive.
The researchers speculated it might have been due to performance anxiety, essentially. Like, knowing people are praying specifically for your recovery puts extra pressure on you, maybe raises stress levels if things aren't going perfectly. Why isn't God healing me? Kind of thoughts.
Wow. So the big takeaway.
The attribute of God answering prayers for physical healing, when put to a rigorous empirical test, just didn't show up. It was indistinguishable from chance, or maybe even slightly detrimental if the person knew about it.
Okay, test case number 2, creation. The literal interpretation, God created the world in 6 days, maybe a global flood happened, that kind of thing.
Right, the claims derive from a literal reading of texts like Genesis. This one. Well, this one runs headlong into basically all of modern science.
It's not just one field, is it?
Not at all. Geology tells us the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. Cosmology puts the universe at 13.8 billion years. Paleontology shows fossils and layers dating back hundreds of millions of years. Genetics shows the evolutionary relationships between species.
Biology, chemistry, physics.
They all point to an ancient Earth and universe, and to life evolving over vast timescales through processes like natural selection. The timeline and the mechanisms described in science are just fundamentally incompatible with a literal 6-day creation or a single global flood covering the highest mountains a few thousand years ago.
So to hold on to that literal belief,
You essentially have to reject huge swaths of established science. You have to believe that geology, physics, biology, astronomy are all fundamentally wrong or deliberately misleading. The evidence against literal creationism is just overwhelming. That specific attribute creator in 6 days global flood shaper is pretty decisively falsified by the physical evidence.
All right, third attribute, divine justice. The idea that God is just, moral, ensures good triumphs, or guides history towards a just end.
Ah, yes. This runs smack into the problem of evil, one of the oldest and toughest philosophical challenges for theism.
If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, why is the world so full of suffering and injustice?
Exactly. Why do horrible things happen to good people? Why do tyrants often live long, prosperous lives while innocent children suffer terribly from disease or natural disasters? The sheer scale and apparent randomness of suffering in the world seems impossible to reconcile with the idea of an actively intervening, perfectly just deity.
God could stop it if all-powerful, and would stop it if all good. But it continues.
Precisely. The common theological responses usually involve deferring justice to an afterlife. It'll all be sorted out later, or claiming it's part of some mysterious greater plan we can't understand.
Which sounds a bit like an evasion.
Our sources critique it that way, saying it's a mystery, or wait for the next life, doesn't actually explain the observable injustice. In the world we can actually see and test, divine justice seems indistinguishable from random chance, or, frankly, human cruelty and indifference. The attribute of ensuring moral outcomes in this world doesn't seem supported by the evidence of daily life.
Okay, final test case. The personal inner experience. That feeling many believers have of God's presence, of communication, of divine insight.
Right, the subjective experience, which can be incredibly powerful for individuals. The claim is often that this feeling comes from an external divine source communicating with the person.
But neuroscience has something to say about this now, doesn't it?
It does. A lot, actually. Research into the neuroscience of religious experience has shown that these profound states, feelings of awe, unity, timelessness, sensing a presence, correspond to specific patterns of brain activity.
Like you can see it on a brain scan.
Yes. And even more pointedly, experiments using things like transcranial magnetic stimulation, the famous God helmet experiments, can sometimes induce these feelings.
How does that work?
By applying weak magnetic fields to specific parts of the brain, particularly the temporal lobes, researchers found they could reliably trigger experiences that participants described as feeling a sensed presence or spiritual awe or being outside their body.
Without any actual deity involved.
Correct. And research with psychedelics also shows that chemical changes in the brain can produce incredibly profound mystical experiences, often interpreted in religious terms by the person having them.
So the implication is the brain itself can generate these experiences.
It certainly seems capable of it. The brain is the source of all our experiences, after all. While this doesn't disprove an external God definitively, it shows that the subjective feeling of divine communication isn't necessarily evidence for one. The brain can create that feeling internally. So the attribute of God speaks to me becomes much harder to pin down as evidence for an external source.
Looking back at these four: prayer, creation, justice, communication, there's a clear pattern emerging, isn't there?
Absolutely. It's what some call the shrinking God. As science explains more and more, the territory supposedly governed by direct divine action gets smaller and smaller.
Theology keeps retreating.
Exactly. Gives up ground on the age of the earth to geology. It gives up ground on the origin of species to biology. Gives up ground on healing to medicine. It gives up ground on subjective experience to neuroscience. With each retreat, the specific testable attributes of the personal God fall away.
And what's left?
What's often left is something much more vague, much harder to test. God becomes love or mystery or the ground of being. The retreat is from the concrete and testable to the abstract and unfalsifiable. The word God is kept, but its original interventionist meaning has been quietly hollowed out by the evidence.
And that hollowing out, that retreat into abstraction, leads directly to what the source material calls the abstract God trick, right? This move to redefine God into something philosophers like Spinoza might recognize, but most believers wouldn't.
Precisely. It's a classic bait and switch. You start with a traditional God, the one who performs miracles, answers prayers, judges sin, who is becoming increasingly difficult to defend rationally.
The old man with the beard.
Right. That God is vulnerable to scientific and logical critique. So when challenged, the sophisticated apologist pivots. They switch to discussing God as this abstract, impersonal force, the elegance of the cosmos, the mystery of existence, Spinoza's God.
Which is conveniently impossible to disprove, because it barely means anything specific.
Exactly. It's a metaphor, a poetic label for the universe itself. Who can argue against the mystery of existence?
But the contradiction you mentioned earlier becomes really obvious here.
Glaringly obvious. Because the same person making this sophisticated philosophical argument about an impersonal, non-interventionist God often goes right back to behaving as if they believe in the old one.
They still pray for specific outcomes, expect miracles, judge morality based on ancient texts.
Yes. They invoke Spinoza's God for intellectual defense, but they live by the rules and expectations of the personal God. It's trying to have it both ways, holding two completely contradictory ideas at the same time.
That sounds like serious cognitive dissonance.
It is. Sam Harris talks about this kind of linguistic game. It's like redefining ghost to mean just your feelings about people you've lost. Then you can say, I believe in ghosts, without actually believing in anything supernatural. You've just emptied the word of its original meaning.
So the word God gets stretched and redefined specifically to survive in a world where the original concept is facing too many challenges from science and reason.
Olá, bem-vindo ao podcast Ateísmo em Debates. Este podcast tem como objetivo apresentar tópicos que geralmente não têm uma resposta fechada, seja porque não existe uma resposta fechada mesmo, então o debate seria o melhor formato, seja porque muitas vezes o consciente coletivo acaba vendo como um debate, né? Então, questões, por exemplo, como se o cristianismo seria um bem comum, né? Ou se seria melhor o mundo cristão, o mundo ateu, são tópicos que a gente pode se basear em evidências, mas não tem uma resposta que esteja definitiva, né? Então, ateísmo em debates tem como esse objetivo. O objetivo também é trazer debates clássicos, né? Como grandes figuras que se debateram, como Dawkins, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens e muito mais. Eu também gostaria de produzir, talvez no futuro, alguns debates com pessoas ateístas ou até cristãos. Esse é um desafio enorme, porque encontrar pessoas que queiram participar do debate não tem sido fácil. Mas se você quiser indicar alguém, quiser participar de algum debate público, eu acho que o ateísmo ele tem um potencial muito forte, especialmente para gerar debates públicos, né, sobre assuntos importantes, como a presença cristã, no caso do Brasil, ou no mundo inteiro, né, a secularização. Então, eu acho que o ateísmo em debates é uma forma de criar consciência coletiva em vez de impor, né? Ou seja, é uma forma de fazer divulgação científica, pensamento crítico, mas sem necessariamente impor uma verdade absoluta. Por isso que os episódios que vocês vão ver, eles são geralmente apresentando dois lados, né? E para quem é ateu, um dos lados pode parecer de forma ridícula ou de forma até impossível, né? Mas essa sensação é importante, que a gente tenha essa sensação de ouvir os dois lados, né? Seja aquele que defende a fé, a religião, seja aquele que defende a razão. Então, por mais que possa parecer que não faz nenhum sentido o outro lado, acho importante porque a gente vive uma sociedade cristã, de maioria cristã, independentemente se a gente concorda ou não, é importante que, como ateu, a gente aprenda a conviver com o lado oposto, mesmo que não pareça correto, que pareça ridículo. Eu quero convidar vocês a conhecer os meus livros na Amazon. São vários livros, né? E o meu livro talvez mais focado a esse podcast Ateísmo e Debates, A Revolução Ateísta, a última minoria silenciada, que é um livro que será lançado em volumes, né? Então, fica o convite. Abração a todos.
That's the core of the trick. It's dangerous because it allows the label to persist in intellectual circles even after the substance has been eroded. It lets people feel intellectually sophisticated, my God is just the universe, while still clinging to the comforts or the dogma of traditional faith. It's a way to avoid atheism without looking scientifically illiterate.
Couldn't someone argue, though, that this isn't a trick, but just evolving their understanding, moving from a childish view to a more mature, metaphorical one?
That's the charitable interpretation, and maybe it's true for some individuals. But the test, as we discussed, is consistency. If someone truly believes only in Spinoza's God, the impersonal laws of nature, then things like petitionary prayer, belief in miracles, or basing specific moral laws on divine command make no sense.
So the key question to ask someone who pulls this move is...
The test question. Okay, your God is the mystery of the universe. Fine. Do you pray to this mystery? Do you expect it to intervene in your life or violate the laws of physics for you?
And if they say yes,
then they're not really talking about Spinoza's God. They're using the abstract language as a smokescreen for the good old-fashioned personal God. The abstraction is just a defense mechanism, not a genuinely held philosophical position. The constant need to redefine is basically an admission that the original hypothesis wasn't working.
Okay, let's tackle another major line of argument, especially from the intelligent design movement. This is the argument from complexity, or information.
Right, the idea, often put forward by people like John Lennox, that complexity, especially the kind we see in biology like DNA, must imply an intelligent designer.
The analogy is usually a book implies an author, or a program implies a programmer. DNA is like complex code, therefore.
Therefore, there must have been a coder. an author God. It's an intuitive argument because complex things we encounter in daily life are usually designed by humans.
But intuition can be misleading in science, can't it?
Very much so. And our source material brings up a fascinating counterexample from computer science that directly challenges this complexity implies consciousness, intuition,
Yeah.
the Suggen algorithm.
Scigen. I think I've heard of this. It generates fake computer science papers, right?
Exactly. It was developed at MIT, partly as a critique of academic publishing standards. But philosophically, it's incredibly relevant here.
How does it work? Is it intelligent?
Not at all. That's the whole point. Scigen is basically a sophisticated random text generator. It uses what's called a context-free grammar, a set of rules about how technical terms and sentence structures fit together in computer science papers. It has zero understanding, zero consciousness, zero intention. It just mechanically combines jargon according to these rules.
A dumb mechanical process, as the source described it.
Precisely. But here's the mind-blowing part. Papers generated by this dumb mechanical process have actually been accepted for publication in peer-reviewed conferences and journals.
Seriously, human experts thought these nonsense papers were legitimate.
Yes, because the papers looked plausible. They had the right structure, the right jargon, the right formatting. The syntax was correct, even though the semantics, the actual meaning was complete gibberish.
Wow. Okay, I see the implication.
It shatters the intuition. Suggen proves that you can get highly complex, structured, seemingly coherent output from a completely mindless mechanical process. Complexity as structure does not automatically require a conscious mind behind it.
And this resonates with modern AI, too, like ChatGPT and other large language models.
Absolutely. These models produce stunningly complex and fluent text. But fundamentally, they're statistical parrots, as some researchers call them. They work by predicting the next most likely word based on vast amounts of training data. They don't understand what they're saying in the human sense.
So if the complexity implies mind argument were true, we'd have to say ChatGPT is conscious.
Which almost no AI expert believes.
Yeah.
We're mistaking fluent output for genuine understanding. Suggen already showed us on a smaller scale that you can get the appearance of design without a designer.
And the specific analogy of DNA as a book or code, is that even accurate biologically?
It's a misleading metaphor. DNA isn't primarily about semantic meaning like a book. It's a molecule whose sequence determines how proteins are built. It's a mechanistic process translation. The meaning is functional, not symbolic.
Plus, if it were a book written by an intelligent author.
It's a pretty badly edited book. The genome is full of non-coding sections, junk DNA, repetitive sequences, remnants of ancient viruses, disabled genes. It's got redundancy and errors.
Not exactly elegant design.
Not at all. But it looks exactly like what you'd expect from millions of years of evolution, a messy historical process of trial and error, building new things on top of old, repurposing bits and pieces. It looks like history, not design.
So the whole information implies intelligence argument relies on a faulty analogy and ignores how complexity can arise naturally or even mechanically, like with Suggen.
Right. It confuses the fact that we can recognize patterns and find the universe intelligible with the idea that there must have been an intender who put the patterns there for us. It's projecting our own minds onto the cosmos.
Okay, let's bring this towards a conclusion by looking at how we define the positions themselves. What about atheism? Apologists often paint it as this dogmatic, absolute claim. I know for sure God doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's a common straw man argument. They try to frame atheism as a positive claim. God does not exist. Which then, they argue, bears a burden of proof, and proving a universal negative is impossible.
But is that really what atheism means intellectually?
Not typically, no. The more common and intellectually defensible definition of atheism, sometimes called weak atheism or simply agnostic atheism, isn't a positive claim about reality. It's a statement about belief. It's simply the lack of belief in God.
Well, like, I don't see enough evidence to believe.
Exactly. It's a position of withholding assent. It aligns perfectly with scientific skepticism. Don't accept a claim until it meets its burden of proof. The default position is non-belief.
So demanding proof of atheism is missing the point.
It's a category error. They're confusing ontology, what exists, with epistemology, what we believe or know. Yes, the absence of God isn't a thing that exists, but the state of not believing is a real cognitive state. Asking an atheist to prove atheism is like asking someone who doesn't believe in leprechauns to prove leprechauns don't exist. It's backwards. The burden is on the one claiming leprechauns do exist.
Right. The person making the positive claim needs to provide the evidence.
Always. They're trying to shift that burden onto the skeptic by mischaracterizing atheism as a positive knowledge claim.
Which brings us back to agnosticism, maybe the scientific kind that Mikio Kaku represents. Believers sometimes point to scientists like him saying, see, even scientists aren't sure, maybe God exists.
Right, but that's often a misinterpretation of scientific agnosticism. When a careful scientist says something is undecidable or we don't know, it's usually an expression of intellectual honesty about the limits of current knowledge or methodology.
It's not an endorsement of the God hypothesis.
Not at all. It's acknowledging uncertainty. The principle, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, is important scientific caution. But it doesn't mean you should therefore believe something for which there is no evidence.
Sam Harris had that analogy about treating guns as if they're loaded.
Yeah, that's a great one. You treat every gun as loaded out of caution as a safety principle. It doesn't mean you actually believe every single gun is loaded. It's a methodological stance.
So scientific agnosticism is like that, a methodological humility.
Exactly. It's operating with the discipline of uncertainty, acknowledging the boundaries of what science can currently address. It should absolutely not be mistaken for faith or for giving credence to specific religious dogmas about a personal God who answers prayers and dictates morality. That's reading way too much into scientific caution. So let's try and wrap this up. We started with, you cannot disprove God. And where have we landed? Well, the conclusion seems nuanced. If God means some deliberately vague, unfalsifiable abstraction, the ground of being, the mystery, then okay, maybe you can't disprove that. Mainly because it's not clear what you'd even be disproving. It's like trying to disprove blueness.
That's not the God most people worship or that shapes societies.
Exactly. The personal God, the one defined by specific actions and attributes, answering prayer, creating life and days, intervening in history, guaranteeing justice, that God makes claims about the observable world. And those claims, when tested empirically, consistently fail.
Prayer doesn't show a measurable effect. Literal creation is contradicted by mountains of evidence. Divine justice is invisible in a suffering world. Religious experience can be generated by the brain.
Right. When every testable attribute fails, what's left? It's an empty label. A word, God, stripped of its concrete meaning, reduced to an abstraction that's conveniently immune to evidence, but still wields enormous social and political power.
That shift to the abstract God really does seem like a rhetorical survival tactic, doesn't it? A way to keep the concept alive in a world increasingly shaped by science and reason, by hiding the failed claims behind philosophical fog.
It seems that way. And maybe the scientific approach, the one that embraces uncertainty, that demands evidence, that revises its conclusions based on data, maybe that's actually a more honest way to relate to the vast unknowns of the universe than clinging to ancient certainties dressed up in modern philosophical language.
So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on. We've seen how the concept of God seems to constantly morph and shrink to avoid being falsified. If its main function now, at least in sophisticated defenses, is just to be a placeholder for whatever science hasn't explained yet, what responsibility do we have?
Good question.
What responsibility do we have to make sure that placeholder, that God of the gaps, doesn't get misused? To ensure it doesn't become a justification for halting inquiry, enforcing dogma, or causing real-world harm based on beliefs that crumble under examination? When you hear you cannot disprove God, maybe the crucial follow-up is always, which God are we talking about? The one whose actions we can test and find wanting, or the one who's become so abstract they're indistinguishable from nothing at all?
Em 1925, na cidade de Dayton, Scopes, jovem mestre, aceitou o vão. A lei Bator dizia que não se podia ensinar que o homem veio do animal. Os jornais chamaram de julgamento do macaco. A cidade virou palco, um grande espetáculo. Não era só fé contra a ciência, era sobre raça, poder e consciência. A praia se ergueu, grande orador, dizia que a ciência trazia ouro. Revolução levava a barbárie, darwinismo social, cruel tirania. A clã marchava, sombra na rua, hierarquia racial, não podia ter lua. Sem fé, dizia Brian, o saber é mal, porta aberta, o caos, caminho fatal. Darrow chegou, agnóstico gigante, defensor da razão, do direito constante. Viu na lei ataque à liberdade, uma teocracia sobre a humanidade. louros ao gramado, calor insuportável, Darwin desafia Brian, ato notável. Pergunta sobre Noé, show sua criação. 6 dias dilúvio era a interpretação. Brian admitiu os dias eram longos. Muralha do literalismo caiu com sons. Derrota moral, mas a lei ainda vigorava. Impacto cultural que a América sentia. Scopes pagou multa, depois anulada pela Suprema Corte, questão técnica aplicada. O julgamento deixou marca e lição, do pois lembrava. Democracia em avaliação. Avaliação. Avaliação.